Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Justin Dyke with the Tualatin Valley Water District. I'm the Communications Director, and we thank you so much for joining us today here for our May edition of Talkin' Water. We're going to cover a lot of information this afternoon, I should say, about spring irrigation preparation. Seems like we've got the timeline pretty well dialed for this one this week, as we're about to go from some soggy early May weather into some really nice. Further ado, we will advance one slide, please, and we will get into today's production. So as a reminder, these sessions are recorded. Please make sure your microphone is muted, and if there is any background noise from other users in the attending this afternoon, we will mute microphones just to preserve audio quality as best as we can. Oh, and it looks like we lost the presentation for a moment. Just a second. All right. And we will have a moderated Q&A after the presentation, but you are more than welcome to type in your questions anytime. So if you look at the red circles there on this screen, during the Q&A, the leftmost circle is the raise hand function. You can use that if you'd like to come off of mute and ask a question directly of our subject matter experts today. You can use the middle red circle for the Q&A function anytime during the presentation, where you can type in your questions as they come to your mind, and we'll answer them afterwards during the Q&A. And the rightmost circle is how you can come on and off of mute so you can use your microphone. Please remember to remain muted during the presentation. And if you have any accessibility needs, in the bottom of your screen, there's a 3-dot ellipsis, and you can click on that to change some of the view settings within your slides. You can magnify the slides to increase their size and the font. You can change the color contrast. You can translate the slides, all of those things to make your viewing experience better, but it will not change the viewing experience for anyone else. Welcome to use those features, and we encourage that for those who need them. And we do operate in an inclusive and discrimination-free manner to serve all of our customers, so we may exclude participants who choose to disrupt any of our events. Next slide, please. And today's experts are going to be our conservation technician, Steve Carper, and Kahlil Howell, our senior water quality inspector. And without any further delay, I will turn this over to our first presenter, Steve Carper. Steve, please take it away.
Thank you, Justin, and good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be with you here today, talking about spring irrigation turn on and tune up. And we don't have a lot of time, so we're just going to jump right to it. And, home irrigation systems are great tools for convenience, and they can also be for efficiency. But in order to achieve that, it's really important that you tune up your system every spring. And today we're going to talk about some tips. We're going to provide some checklists, provide some resources, and talk about some key pieces of equipment that help us keep our water system safe. In order to do this work, it's really helpful to have a few simple tools available that most of us may have in our garage. We'll talk about what they're applicable for here. A large screwdriver can help us access many of the valve boxes that happen to be enclosing the equipment that we're going to be servicing. We're generally looking for the green top valve boxes, and over the course of a season, the dirt can get in there and kind of make things difficult to access. So a large screwdriver can help you provide some leverage and get those boxes open quickly and easily, safely. A small head flat screwdriver will come in handy when we're adjusting some of the sprinklers that we're going to talk about, the most common sprinklers that most folks are going to find in their outdoor irrigation systems. There are several types of manufacturers that produce a variety of sprinkler types. So it's really important to be familiar with your equipment and make sure that you have any specialty adjustment tools that are needed so you can maintain your equipment effectively on a year-to-year basis. A small hand spade or shovel can come in really handy when you open up the valve boxes to service the equipment. It's not uncommon for moles in our area to get in, find their way into the valve boxes and do a pretty good job of filling them up with dirt. And we don't advise using a typical shovel, as there's equipment and wires in those boxes that can be delicate. So it's nice to have a small hand shovel that can help you clean those boxes out, make sure that you've got room to work and identify the equipment that you're going to be servicing. There are some types of valves that we'll talk about today that require specialty valves to turn them. So a valve key that you can find at any any hardware store is good to have. So we'll identify those and show you a picture of specifically what we're talking about, so you can make sure that you've got the right tools to do the job in those circumstances. A pair of gloves, of course, help keep your hands clean and keep you free of superficial nicks and cuts that are easy to incur when you're working in a wet environment. So just a nice set of those rubberized dipped gloves can be really handy for doing this type of work. Give you the tactile dexterity that you need to make these adjustments, but also keep your hands safe. A flashlight can come in handy because we will be working in underground, darker environments, so that makes it easy to identify the equipment that you're servicing. And if you're like me and the knees are getting creaky, a garden knee pad can come in really handy. Makes this type of work a lot more pleasant and effective, so that you're not getting up and down, keep you comfortable to get the job done quickly. So our first step that we're going to do is picking up on the end of last season, where we may have turned off our irrigation system, closed isolation valves, and opened up any drains to let the lateral lines clear out of any standing water, so they're preventing them from freeze damage. We're going to want to go back and close any manual drain valves that you have on the laterals and perhaps on the main lines. And the most typical spot that you're going to find those valves is either at the end of a lateral line, as you see here on the picture on the left, or they can be just downstream of the backflow device in a valve box. On the left here, what you see here is a valve manifold that's still under construction. That's why it looks really nice and clean. There's no valve box surrounding it yet, but it gives you an idea of what that equipment looks like pre-box installation. So what you're seeing is 3 electronic control valves that operate individual zones on an irrigation system. And just at the top here, they have included a manual drain valve at the terminal end of the main line, which during the irrigation system is completely, constantly under pressure. So it's really important before we pressurize that to make sure that we shut off that drain valve. Otherwise, we're going to fill up our valve box and can make it a big mess and difficult to continue on with the work that we're going to talk about today. Similarly, just downstream of a backflow device is another common place for a drain valve to be installed. And so it's just, again, good to make sure that those boxes are good and cleaned out. You've exposed all of the equipment inside so that you can see what it is that you're dealing with. Keep in mind that every irrigation system is going to be different. Not all systems have drain valves. So if you don't see that, it's not a big issue, but you want to be aware if you have the opportunity to do that type of work. But if you open them up if you open them up in the fall, make sure that we get them closed down in the spring before you pressurize the system. There are certain types of valves are going to also have these drain caps on them. So you want to make sure that if your valve has this type of a drain cap, this little copper cap on the side, that you tighten that down and then follow the old rule of righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. Turn those by hand, and if necessary, if you don't trust your hand strength, maybe reach in there and gently get a hold of it with a pair of standard pliers and just give it a gentle quarter turn to the right once you've got it hand tight, to make sure that you've got that little cap secured. You don't want to accidentally pressurize that zone and have it get blown off into the valve box. It can be really difficult to locate those tiny little things, and then if you can't find it, it can be a time-consuming and a little bit of an expensive repair. So make sure that those caps are tightened down securely. There's various types of valves that you may encounter when you're looking for your drain valve. To the left, we see a ball valve, and it's operated by this swing arm. And the thing to keep in mind when you're working with a ball valve is when the arm is parallel with the pipe, the valve is open. When it's perpendicular, it's closed. So it's pretty simple. It only turns about a 90-degree switch. So real easy to do. Another really common type of valve is basically looks like a hose spigot, and you've got basically a small gate valve in here, and you just turn that handle to the right to tighten it down and close it, or you turn it to the left to open it. Very simple operation. Over on the right is the specialty cross cross valve that requires this valve key to turn it easily. Now, it can be operated by hand, but generally over time they get a little bit sticky and tight, and it's not the most comfortable operation to try and open and close these types of valves by hand. So a valve key like this, $5 at a Ace Hardware, Home Depot, that type of a hardware store, will make that type of operation much simpler and safer. I'm going to turn it over to Cal now to talk a little bit about backflow prevention. Take it away, Cal.
Thank you, Steve. For those of you guys watching versus just listening in, I am going to be using a laser pointer, so feel free to follow that along. Back here. Okay, so there's actually up to 5 different types of backflow preventers which can be installed on your irrigation system. However, in Oregon, and specifically here in the district, there's these 3 most common types. And starting with the most common, on the left, the double check valve assembly, or just the double check. This is probably over 95% of what we would see on a residential irrigation system. So this is probably what you have to your irrigation. In the middle here is the pressure vacuum breaker assembly, called just the PVB. And then on the right is the atmospheric vacuum breakers, or the AVBs. Now, whatever type of backflow preventer you have, no matter the type, they're all designed to accomplish the same primary purpose. And this is to protect the drinking water and the community's drinking water from contamination. In the application of an underground sprinkler system specifically, it is installed at the point where your irrigation system connects to your home's plumbing. It's a mechanical one-way valve that allows water to flow in one direction, which is into your sprinkler system, but will not allow water from your sprinkler system to get back into the drinking water, as long as it's functioning properly. So we can all imagine some of the contaminants that could exist in our lawn, from fertilizers to animal feces to just the biological hazard of stagnant water. That water drains back into the sprinkler heads, into that piping, and the backflow preventer makes sure that doesn't get into the drinking water. So the double check valve assembly and the pressure vacuum breaker assembly, these require annual testing, which is why they have shutoff valves and test ports to complete that annual test by a certified tester. The atmospheric vacuum breaker is actually just a device which requires inspection, a visual inspection upon its initial installation, or if it's ever replumbed or moved. However, it does not require any annual maintenance. The double check is typically housed in the ground in a valve box with a green lid, as Steve had mentioned earlier. This could be out by your meter, somewhere else in your front yard, in your backyard, in some cases even in a garage, a crawl space, or a basement. Both of the vacuum breaker types are always above ground. Actually, for them to prevent backflow properly, they must be above ground. The pressure vacuum breaker, 12 inches above all the downstream piping, getting that thing quite a bit off the ground and difficult to properly freeze protect at times. The atmospheric vacuum breaker, being unique in that there will be multiple of these. There will be one AVB per zone. So for however many solenoid zones you have, you'll have an equal amount of atmospheric vacuum breakers. So on the next slide, we're going to discuss some of the operation of the most common backflow preventer, being the double check valve assembly. So the double check valve assembly, there are always 2 shutoff valves, which are these green handled valves, and 4 test ports, which have these black caps on top, and then what looks like a flathead screwdriver slot. The test port operation with the screwdriver is going to operate those valves in either direction. So they will actually endlessly turn in either direction. And for that valve to be closed, that screwdriver slot needs to be perpendicular to the test port. For it to be opened, it needs to be in line or parallel with the test port. The shutoff valve, very similar in operation, or I guess I should say in function, in that if the handle is parallel with the shutoff, it is open. If it is perpendicular, it is closed. These should actually have a stopping point unless the valve is broken. And if you're missing a shutoff valve, which sometimes the condition ends up being a rusted shutoff valve or something like this, you can often get a crescent wrench down in there onto what remains of the shutoff valve to operate it, but could be a time to consider some maintenance to a backflow assembly missing shutoff valve handles. So if your system has not yet been started up for the season and it's still winterized from last year, these 4 ports and shutoff valves can be in various different positions. So it is in the next slides, we're going to go over how to close these valves properly and then open them up to pressurize the sprinkler system. However, first we want to locate our irrigation isolation valve if we have one. If you do, it's going to be typically a circular valve can, which sits flush to the ground, like this picture here, where my laser pointer is, or this center picture is another example. The isolation valve can also be in the same box as your backflow assembly, so this rectangular box. And if you do not have an irrigation isolation valve, then you may be actually utilizing the shutoff on the backflow assembly itself to isolate that irrigation system. On the right-hand side here is just an example of what you may find in that valve can. So some of the isolation valve types, the more common ones would be ball valves and gate valves. And so similar to the operation of the drain valve that Steve covered earlier, you have this cross-handled type valve and this circular handled valve, which operate like faucets. And then this ball valve here, this is a PVC one. It may be brass, perpendicular, closed, inline, or parallel, opened. So it's probably closed if you've not yet started up your system for the season. If you have one that is like this bottom right valve can, this is a mystery one. So until you reach your arm down in there, you'd have to discover what is in there for you. So definitely a hand pump could be an additional tool to pump water out and reach down in there after clearing cobwebs to see what you find. Before we open this valve, however, we want to do some operations to our backflow assembly. So before, kind of an optional step, kind of a DIY leak detection would be making sure first all our valves in our home are closed. So we have no water flowing anywhere in our plumbing system, and go out and actually look at our meter. And there is often a little blue triangle. And if that is at a dead standstill, it means there's no water flowing to your plumbing system. If there's any movement clockwise, it means that there's water flowing into your plumbing system. So making sure everything is closed and looking at that at a standstill, and then moving into these 5 steps here to pressurize the irrigation system, going back to that meter and seeing if there's any movement. And if there is movement at that point, it may indicate there is a leak in the sprinkler system. So first we want to actually start by closing the 2 shutoff valves and the 4 test ports. Then we want to open that isolation valve that we previously discussed, which introduces pressure up to the backflow assembly, then confirm there's no leaks from that isolation valve to the assembly. Now we can open the shutoff 1 on the backflow assembly, which introduces pressure into the backflow assembly. At this point, we'd want to confirm that these 4 ports are not leaking, and that the body of the assembly is also not leaking. You can look for a direction of flow arrow on the body of the assembly, or knowing that this number 1 test port here is always on the outside of a shutoff valve, and that is closest to your isolation valve. Once you're at this point, we are ready to open shutoff valve number 2 to introduce pressure up to your solenoid valves. Do this step slowly so you don't cause any water hammer to your solenoid valves. And at this point, you have pressure up to your sprinkler system, and Steve will cover working your timer later on for the timing of your different zones. I'll be brief, but we're gonna quickly talk about annual backflow testing of these assemblies. So for all customers that have backflow assemblies in the district, both the state and the district require these assemblies to be tested once a year. As a district customer, there's 2 ways to accomplish this test. You can hire your own state certified tester, or you can subscribe to the district's Gold Plan annual testing program. But first, let's talk about finding your own tester. If you want to hire your own, that is absolutely okay. Just a few key points is all testing is due before September 1st of each year. However, feel free to have this test completed earlier, such as the springtime is an optimal time. You'll receive several notices from us throughout the year to remind you of this annual test. To find a tester, on that notice, it includes a website, which is a state website to local testers. However, I actually recommend talking to a neighbor or friends or family that you have that which live in the district and see if they have any recommendations. It's a good thing to know that the tester you hire and are paying for their service, it's their responsibility to submit the test results to the district. Now, for those customers who do not meet that September 1st due date, they are assigned to what's called enforcement testing. Now, I know enforcement can sound a little bit intimidating, but basically what it is, we apply a $65 charge to the customer's water bill, and we actually send out a contracted tester to complete that testing on your behalf to bring that test into compliance and confirm its functionality. Now, that $65 enforcement charge is not to be mistaken with the Gold Plan. This is the optional service which we're going to discuss right now. So this is, like I said, optional for all residential customers, or I should say most residential customers. And it's considered a subscription, and there's roughly about 10,000 customers in our Gold Plan, which is over half of our residential customers who have backflow assemblies. The program is designed for readily accessible assemblies in locations which don't require timed appointments. So if your assembly is in a garage or a basement or a crawl space, it would be more suitable to schedule your test with an independent testing company. You can submit an online application and also just learn more about the program at our website. But make sure if you submit an application that you do so prior to May 31st, so that's coming up here before too long, in order to be included in this year's testing. The Gold Plan, the Gold Plan subscription is a $35 charge added to your water bill just once per year. And then we arrange your testing through our contracted backflow testers. If the backflow assembly were to fail or need any maintenance, we credit you $50 towards that annual test. That was pretty brief. And if you have more questions about the assembly functionality or annual testing, please add those to the chat. But with that, I'm going to give it back to Steve.
Thanks, Cal. Great information. So now we're going to shift our focus back to the irrigation system specifically. And if your system is new to you, if you just bought your home and it happens to have a system and you're not really sure what it is you're dealing with, we've just provided this slide as a general overview of the anatomy of an irrigation system, if you will. And generally what you're going to find is the main line coming in through the meter, generally near the sidewalk and the driveway is the most common place to find your meter box. And then just downstream of that, the main line, the main service line is going to be heading into your house. At some point in between there will be your point of connection. That's where your irrigation system connects to that main line and then heads off to hopefully an isolation valve where you a ball or a gate valve that will allow you to isolate your irrigation system from the potable supply going into your home. Just downstream of that, you'll find your backflow device. In this image, it's above ground, as Cal said. There's various types. Most common in our area, again, is going to be a double check assembly, which will be subgrade in a valve box, generally a rectangular box with a green lid about the size of a 9x13 baking pan, if you will. And then from there, your main line goes downstream to various electronic valves that will again be in either round circular valve boxes with a green lid or those rectangular valve boxes if there are more than one valve in that box. And again, every system is different depending on the needs and the design of that irrigation system. But from those electronic valves, then you have what are called your lateral lines that go off to the various sprinkler zones, be they pop-up spray, which is the most typical type of sprinkler that folks are going to have in their yard, or you can also have single stream rotators. It is what it sounds like. There's a single stream of water that oscillates back and forth. Or you can also have drip lines, which are going to be your most effective and efficient application of water. Just to kind of give you an idea of what a typical layout looks like. Now we're going to take a view of a nice video here. It's a bit dated, but the information is still valid. You'll see a much younger version of myself, and let's go ahead and take a look here. All right, and I'll just reinforce that the Regional Water Providers Consortium website is a really great resource, not only for irrigation tips and tools and instructional videos like that, but indoor efficiency as well. So keep that in mind and use that as a resource. So many folks think would say that this next slide is really the only step in terms of their annual maintenance is to turn on the irrigation controller and get back to it and let it do its thing. But please don't limit your annual maintenance to this one step. It's really the root of most irrigation calls that I end up responding to during the season and at the end of the season when folks have received an abnormally, shockingly high bill. I go out and find oftentimes the root of the issue is in a misprogrammed irrigation controller. So it's really important if you only do one assignment from today's talk, it's read your instruction manual and get familiar with how your controller is operated. How do you set it properly? Excuse me. If you no longer have your manual or you can't find it, almost every time you can look and determine what the model is and find that online nowadays. So really a crucial point to effective irrigation management. Better yet, take the next step and invest in what's called a weather-based irrigation controller, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Take advantage of rebates that may be available to you. The next thing we're going to talk about is the specialty tools that you may need to make the sprinkler adjustments. Again, if you just have pop-up sprinklers that spray out the water in a fixed pattern, that's the easiest sprinkler to adjust, and it really just requires a small flathead screwdriver. In the top of the nozzle, there will be a small slotted screw, and if you twist to the right, that little screw, it will actually restrict the radius and shorten the distance that the water goes away from the sprinkler head. Oppositely, if you turn that to the left and open up that little screw as far as it will go, that will then increase the radius to its furthest extent. And generally on top of the nozzle, it will be marked with a 5, 10 to 15 in most cases, which indicates the maximum radius that sprinkler will allow water to go. If you have sprinklers like an MP rotator or a Rainbird rotator, any of the new high efficiency rotating type sprinklers, those tend to require a very specific tool. So again, you want to make sure that you know what manufacturer produced the products that you have and get that adjustment tool so that you can keep it in a safe place or on top of the irrigation controller so you have that accessible when the time comes to make those adjustments. Same thing with the single stream rotors. Each of the manufacturers tends to have their own very specific adjustment tools. So become familiar, make sure you've got the right tool for the job. There's some auxiliary equipment that you may want to consider adding, or if you have them, make sure that you're maintaining, and that's rain sensors and weather stations. Rain sensors are basically a shutoff or a system inhibiting device that will basically, if we get effective rainfall, will turn the system off until a little disc inside of the sensor dries out and allows the system to go back on again. And in our area, it's really an effective tool in the spring and the fall months, where, as we're probably going to find out again this weekend, is things will start to dry out, and there may be a need to start supplementing with some additional supplemental water. However, we're still going to get some effective rainfall between now and July 6th, and that these devices again will inhibit the operation of your system when it's not needed, and that can save you some money on your bill. Weather stations are a key component of what we call the weather-based irrigation controllers, and that's really the new state of the art. What that means is basically you either have an on-site weather station. In many cases, there are weather-based irrigation controllers that are now connected to a Wi-Fi signal that don't require an on-site weather station, that are using real-time on-site or regional weather data to make daily schedule adjustments. So it really takes a lot of the complicated math, basically, your requirement to do some figuring to do schedule adjustments in order to keep your irrigating schedule as efficient as possible. These new systems really do that for you, and most regional water providers are providing rebates to retrofit your old devices to the new weather-based controllers. Here we've provided you just a handy checklist for your spring maintenance tune-ups. I'm not going to go through each device, but again, just want to reiterate the importance of verifying how your irrigation controller is programmed. Make sure that you don't have additional start times or redundant programming. Again, that's the most common issue that I find when I go out and do site visits, is a misprogrammed controller, and it's really easy to do because you're dealing with these tiny little LCD screens that can be pretty confusing. So again, it's really important to understand how your controller works and get it set properly. Next thing I would encourage you to consider, if you don't have a weather-based system, is consider signing up for the regional water providers weekly watering number. It's a great service that can help you understand both how long do you need to operate each zone on your system to set an effective base schedule for 1 inch per week. But then you'll get an email on a weekly basis that provides you a simple number that you think of as a percentage that you then go out and use to make a simple adjustment. You turn, most irrigation controllers have what's called a water budget, forgive me, or a percent adjustment feature. You simply turn the dial on the controller to that percent adjustment or water budget feature, and you change the setting to that percentage. So for example, if the weekly watering number in the email is 1.12 inches, I'm simply going to think of that as a percentage, and that would be 112%. So I would go out to my controller, I would turn the dial to the percent adjust, and then I would make that adjustment as close to that, whatever it is. Sometimes the controllers will only adjust in 5 or 10% increments. So again, you just get it as close to the number as you can, turn the dial back to run, and you're done. What that does is it recalibrates all of the zones accordingly. So it just, like for 112, so if you're going to be adjusting up by 12% all of the zones on the system, and you don't have to do any calculations. In the fall, for example, you may get a number of, say, 0.89 inches. You simply think of it as a percentage, and then you're adjusting down by 11% all of the zones on your system. It makes it really simple. So I encourage you to take advantage of that tool. Again, it helps you get a better understanding of how each zone on your system operates and how to set it for a base schedule. But again, how do you make a simple adjustment to the entire system on a weekly basis? And that's really going to help you maximize the efficiency across the irrigation season. With that, I think we will turn it over to Justin to guide us through a Q&A session with our attendees.
Absolutely. Thanks so much to Steve and Cal. I've learned a lot from them in these presentations over the years, including a lot of changes to my own backyard irrigation to reduce overspray and runoff and so many of these things. So really appreciate the expertise. That was a great time. As a reminder, folks, if you do have questions, type them in or use the raised hand feature. We'll only have a couple right now, and they are for Cal right now. So we will ask the first question. Cal, is the $35 covering the backflow test? If there's no problems, then the cost is just the $35 per year, or there's additional cost to pay the tester?
It's a great question, and I apologize if I didn't make that more clear previously. So the $35 charge does cover the test. So in essence, you're paying $35 for a backflow test. We charge that earlier in the year to avoid any peak months through the summer. So we charge all Gold Plan customers on their March or April water bill. And then from those customers, we assign to our contracted testers who complete the testing between March and September. And if you have multiple assemblies, it is $35 per backflow assembly. And so you'll never exchange money with the tester. It is all just done automatically on the water bill.
Awesome. Thank you. And the next question says, my system was installed many years ago, and I don't know how to identify whether it has a backflow setup on it. If I enroll in the Gold Plan and the inspector doesn't find one, what are my options?
Yeah, so different outcomes there depending upon what the tester finds. Typically, I can actually come out to your property and rather than you paying the $35 to send a tester out to look for this assembly, I would rather just come out rather than you being charged to see what we can find. It may be to our surprise that we find a backflow assembly. It's not uncommon that during the plumbing permitting process, when it was initially installed, there was not a report supplied to the district. So it basically fell under the radar at that point. However, let's say I were to come out and we don't find one at all, we would work with you, on a good time frame, so you have some time to plan for it. But basically installing a backflow preventer. So typically someone who holds an LCB, a landscape contracting board license, is able to install a backflow assembly. So they'd find that point where the assembly where your irrigation connects to your plumbing, and they would cut one in right about at that point. And I can go over much more detail with you. We'll make sure my phone number is dropped in the chat, so you can reach out to me directly, and we can look into that together.
Thanks, Cal. And we do have a raised hand from someone who just appears to be a guest. So if you do have your hand raised right now, go ahead and take yourself off mute and ask your question.
Hi, that's me. Sorry, I'm not sure how that got in there. TVWD guest, but this is Shell. The quick question I have is about watering recommendation. Steve, you mentioned, typical recommendation of 1 inch per week. And in past, I have used those measuring cup, try to measure it and water no more than 1 inch. But it has never turned out to be, enough water to prevent grass from turning brown. Always way less, right? It's more like 3 to 4 inches a week that keeps the grass green. So what's the secret to keep, obviously not just a single factor, but I'm sure there are many, but in terms of the watering recommendation, is it time of the day? Is it how much you do it in one time? But if you can give a little more on that.
Sure. Well, thanks for the question. And irrigation is far from a perfect science, and there probably is several factors that play into it. You mentioned time of day. That's one key thing. Most folks are aware that, it's best to either water really early in the morning or later in the evening. You want to get a little bit farther away from 5 o'clock, which tends to be, peak heat. If you start at 6, you're not really avoiding that too much. But we've kind of shifted over to after 10 at night or before, certainly before 10 in the morning is the best window. I prefer the very early morning hours of somewhere between 4 and 6, actually. So the couple reasons for that: I don't like to water late at night and then let it sit in the cool all night. There are theories that can lead to some disease, make things more conducive to that. So time of day, that can be a factor. But I think more likely is what we call, to get technical on you a little bit, is distribution uniformity, or the overall efficiency of how the irrigation system has been designed or laid out. Typically, in a best practice, what we want to see is what's called head-to-head coverage. And what that means is the water from one sprinkler should actually hit the head of its adjacent sprinkler, and vice versa. And that's the ideal layout throughout an irrigation zone, and it can be more difficult to achieve than you might imagine. And oftentimes, unfortunately, when systems are built, a general contractor may come in and just drop 4 sprinklers on a corner and hope for the best. They think that they're spraying water across the zone, and as long as the ends of the spray are kind of touching, a lot of folks think that's adequate coverage, when really what you need is a complete overlap from sprinkler head to sprinkler head. So that's one thing you want to kind of assess when you turn on your system and look at how it's performing, and you make those sprinkler adjustments on the radius. That head-to-head coverage is what you really want to strive for to get the best uniformity. And then, speaking to the 1 inch per week, that is assuming that you've got a really well-designed, well laid out system. And if you don't have that, if you only apply 1 inch a week, you are going to see deficiencies. You will see brown spots. So in order to accommodate for that and get things green uniformly, oftentimes you then will have to extend run times.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. We're going to jump back over to the chat real quick. We have another question about irrigation from Sarah, who writes, the previous owner converted irrigation to drip lines in raised garden beds. I want to convert back to sprinkler heads. I have found at least one sprinkler head buried under weed barrier and mulch in one area. Are there companies that will map it all out and help me convert it?
Absolutely. Kind of jumping onto Cal's point about reaching out and using somebody that has a license from the Landscape Construction Board, Landscape Contractors Board, and what you're looking for is a landscape construction professional that is licensed to do irrigation work. And in speaking to backflow devices specifically, that they're all phases, that they have that backflow phase included in their license. Really important that you find somebody that's licensed and insured to do this type of work, so that you find somebody that's competent to do it effectively. It's not going to create more issues for you. But yes, what I would suggest is to go on a local Google or what's the Angie's List, and look for or service similar to that, and look for irrigation contractors, and then use the Landscape Contractors Board website to verify that they are licensed, bonded, and insured to do that type of work in our area. And then again, you're just going to have that assurance that they are qualified to do that work. And yes, there's many companies in our area that can help you with the situation that you're looking for.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. And we've got a customer who has their hand raised, also named Steve. So Steve, who is our guest today, please go ahead and take yourself off mute and ask your question.
I just did. Thank you. My question is, with Netafim drip lines, how do you keep squirrels from chewing up the lines?
Steve, if you find the answer to that question, I'm going to take this opportunity to have you host our next Talking Water event next spring. Unfortunately, it's an ongoing thing with that Netafim type line. I would say the best solution is to make sure that the Netafim line, and folks that don't know, Netafim is it's half-inch drip line that, again, in best practice, what you're going to do, the way that should be installed is on top of the mineral soil, but underneath a layer of mulch. So, bark dust, fir bark, hemlock bark, compost, something like that. That way the water is getting down into the root zone, but then you have something protecting that netophyme, not only from your own maintenance rakes kicking, or if you have a service coming in, but at least some sort of a visual deterrent from the squirrels who, they're opportunists. When they learn that that's where the water comes from and they're thirsty, they're going to chew on it. And we do that. We have to inspect our system out in the demonstration garden for that type of typical repair every spring because we have clever squirrels.
Well, thank you for saying that. My licensed contractor suggested that I keep the netafim above the bark dust. You're saying keep it underneath.
Yeah, I mean, for a couple of aesthetically, it's not the most attractive thing to look at. Then I think also from an evaporation standpoint, having it now, it makes it challenging. You're not able to necessarily visually inspect and see that each of those emitters is free and flowing. But in theory, they should be designed to, that's how they're designed to work, is to be installed underneath the mulch layer, not buried again under mineral soil, which has a much finer composition of clay or loam. But if you have larger particles that are not necessarily going to be drawn back into that hose, that's what I would do.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course. Thanks for the question. Good one.
Yeah, these are some really great questions, but unfortunately right now I don't see any more. So I'll go ahead and issue our last call for questions either in the chat or
Justin,
raised hands.
I think there's a question maybe got skipped over from Kathy.
Ooh, where would that
about
be?
backflow preventers on outdoor faucet.
Oh, okay. Cal,
yes,
are there backflow preventers on outdoor faucets? I apologize, Kathy. I scrolled past that one, but Cal, go for it.
It was for me, so I was excited to get to it. So outdoor faucets per plumbing code, they are required to have what's called a hose bib vacuum breaker on all threaded outlets other than washing machine hookups and boiler drains. So that includes those outdoor spigots that would require them. Now, those are not testable. So it was, let's just say, I think in the late 90s, that was included in the plumbing code to require those hose bib vacuum breakers. So homes built prior to that year would not have those hose bib vacuum breakers on them. Homes built afterwards would. And however, if you looked at your hose bib and it did not have a hose bib vacuum breaker, this is probably not going to look very good on camera. But there are these, if you're looking at the camera, there's retrofittable hose bib vacuum breakers that you could buy at a hardware store. We have some here. If you have a few hose bibs that you want protected, I'd be happy to give you a few of ours. And basically, you'd just thread that on there prior to your hose. So you'd take your hose off, install a hose bib vacuum breaker, and then your hose onto it. So it basically allows water flow from your home through this backflow preventer, then to your garden hose. So anything that's in your garden hose couldn't make it back into your plumbing system. They're intended to have no downstream shutoff valves. So if you're using a hose nozzle, when you're done watering, after you close that hose bib, you want to relieve the pressure in that line because they're not meant for being continuously pressurized. They'll malfunction over time. There's a little set screw on the hose bib vacuum breakers that are retrofittable, and its intent is to make it somewhat of a permanent installation to your hose bib, so it couldn't just be taken on and off at convenience. So I would suggest tightening that down. Any follow-up questions to that, I'd be happy to answer as well.
Great. Thank you, Cal. Again, this is our last call for questions. Really great questions today. And we do have one more from Janice. Will you be providing a link for information to rebates for a sprinkler controller? Steve, that would be for you.
I'd be happy to. Let me go see if I can find one right now. There it is. Thanks, Frank.
Yep, Frank got that in the chat.
No problem.
right.
I kind of messed up the link, but you should still be able to click it. And if not, you can type it in directly.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for the questions today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy time of the day today, your Wednesday. We really appreciate it. We hope everyone has a great rest of their week with the warm weather and a good irrigation season and gardening season ahead for everybody. And we'll look forward to seeing the rest of everyone else at our next edition of Talkin' Water. Thank you so much. And
Check those schedules.